Jessica Peters with the Analyst's Office. Senator, if you could repeat the question.
Yeah, my question is, when you did your analysis based upon the conclusion that Senator Morlock, I didn't read the report, says that there were excess number of employees, or no, excuse me, the cost overruns were 64% of the projects. We just got testimony that they were at least on time. Now the testimony here says that there were cost overruns. My question is, did you do an analysis of those projects where you had private contractors involved and analyze what their cost overruns were so you can compare apples to apples?
So I think there's a couple of different issues here in our COS program review, which is where I think the original numbers are coming from. That was looking at the total COS program, regardless of whether it was state staff or private contractors. And that was sort of just the broad brush view of the COS program overall having certain issues with lack of accountability, issues with overstaffing, issues with poor quality of data, and looking at the very detailed data that Caltrans uses to develop its budget and its annual staffing request, and finding that that staffing request is generally inflated and based on unreliable data. And so that's where that number is coming from. And then I think there's sort of a separate question in terms of relating to this bill, the cost of state staff versus consultants. We didn't evaluate that in the COS program review, but separately in looking at that issue, we found that the costs are generally about the same. In terms of the different numbers that have been provided, it was mentioned that there's certain estimates of the cost of state staff or of contractors that are provided in the budget. In terms of trying to answer the request, we looked at those and we found that those numbers were not really supported by actual data. And so what we actually did was looked at the actual costs for consultants based on a sampling of actual consultant invoices over a broad range of work. And we had to do this because, again, the sort of the overarching numbers that Caltrans uses were not supported by data, and they actually don't have a data system to track what their costs are. And so, yes, and so in doing that, we compared the full cost of the consultants that we sampled to the fully loaded cost of state staff, which would include the salary, overtime, sick leave, vacation, healthcare, retirement benefits, overhead, and equipment. And in doing that, we found that the costs were roughly the same at about $140 an hour. And so comparing, a state staff to a consultant on an individual staff basis, the costs were about the same.
Did we really achieve reduction in staff so that what we currently have is what we really need for the existing jobs that are before Caltrans? Or is there some sort of, vague, unfilled positions that are still being funded where the money could be released for projects?
Sure, I'm happy to provide a little bit more information. And apologies that we weren't able to provide it at the initial hearing. I believe what was testified to at that time is that since 2007-8, roughly 3,400 COS positions have been eliminated. Those numbers are based on budgeted levels, which included some over budgeting or inflated budgeting in the program. What we did in our analysis and in the program review, which I just want to clarify too, was part of the administration's zero-based budgeting that we did together collaboratively with them. What we used were the actual numbers of how many state staff were actually hired, so getting away from the vacant positions, because those positions were never filled to actually do work. And when looking at the actual numbers, and this is coming from the governor's budget, these are not our estimates, these are the administration's numbers, it was 1,880 full-time equivalents that have been reduced since 2007-8. We accounted for those reductions in the program review and tried to average it out and smooth it out as much as we can. There was a significant increase in workload due to the federal stimulus funds and the Prop 1B funds, and so we tried to account for all of those factors. Our estimate then was the 3,500 positions overstaffing. It's a rough estimate. Ideally, you'd have that detailed zero-based budgeting look, but because the data is so poor or inflated that the department's using in their zero-based budgeting effort, we felt that that was not appropriate to use. And so we did account for that in our staffing numbers, and the actual numbers based on the administration is the 1,880 in terms of reductions. I would note that since our analysis, the administration reduced another 178 positions, as was noted by Mr. Toppin earlier. So that would bring down the number that we would estimate in terms of the overstaffing level.
So that's not a lot from 3,500. You said they were overstaffed. Are you standing by that number minus the 178?
Correct, yes. The only thing that has changed in that time is the reduction of the 178. So it's probably in the neighborhood of roughly 3,300 at this point in time. We would caution it, so it is a rough number, but that was our best estimate based on the best data that we had confidence in.